Years ago, uh, I had, well, I still have this friend, but friend of mine, good friend of mine, saw that I was reading this book and saw the title of it, Criticizing Photographs. And he says, why did someone write a whole book on criticizing photographs? I can criticize a photograph like that. That sucks. That's good. Boom. And so a lot of people feel that way, that judgment is the first thing you do when you look at a piece of artwork. And that's okay. I mean, we all judge. We're all judgy people in a sense. But this judginess, we want this all to be based on everything is making noise in my house today. Yeah, I don't have it turned off. Um, Based on a wealth of knowledge. So let's just get started. Now, I know, many of you may not have read chapter 2 of Criticizing Photographs, but even without the benefit of that, you start defining oops, maybe I need another espresso. So let's define description. I know it sounds very simple, but let's define what is simple description. You're going to describe, well, let's say a photograph. And I might as well start. Sophie, I'm going to start in alphabetical order. Can you just say something? How do you define description? Without using the word describe.
Explaining what you can see in something.
Good. Explaining what you can see in something. So, what is here? What am I looking at? What do I know for certain about these images? Good, good, good. Let's see, Mars, something else. When you're describing something, what are some of the techniques you use to describe? What are you trying to pull out of something?
Um, I want to say like something that comes into my mind is like the investigation of formal elements of like looking at line, shape, composition, juxtaposition of shapes and figures, and also like what like the posing and the positions mean inside of the context that they're in.
Good, good. And doesn't that seem like that's describing the formal qualities of an image?
Mm-hmm.
So, not just, what you're looking at, but then exactly what am I looking at? Line, shape, stuff like that. Yeah. And Angel, what else, when you are describing something, what are some of the other things you look at in order to describe?
Like the environment they're in, whether that they're like sitting, laying down, or like the movement of like their body language, I guess, in the image. That's something I look at.
Terrific, terrific. Yes. So often I will ask students, especially in Photo 1, to describe a photograph, and they'll say something like, well, there's a person there. And that's not all you're looking at. You're right, Angel. That person is either lying down, that person might be running, that person might be doing something. So that's where it's very simple, but it's so important.
Yeah.
And people forget that what people are doing, how they're doing it. Let's see, Jacqueline, what else can you add about how you approach describing
I'm not sure
artwork?
if this would count as like description, but maybe like analyzing more of like the emotional aspect that's present, like what the feeling of it is. I don't know if that would be descriptive.
Yeah, well, obviously, and I talk about this a lot, that description will lead you to that. So if you're describing something and Angel's figure is lying down, you can describe something about the feeling of that as opposed to the figure that's standing up or lifting weight. You know what I mean? You can describe the feeling based on that. Terrific, terrific. Hey, Dennis, you got anything else? When you describe something, what else do you look at? And you are muted possibly. Hey, Dennis, you there?
Sorry, I zoned out. I was getting my notes ready.
Okay.
What
You-
was the
and-
question?
Well, I'm talking about description and how just a real basic thing of how do we define description? Like, what is description when you are going to describe a piece of artwork or a photograph? What are some of the things you look at in order to describe it?
Assume this has already been mentioned, but composition.
Well, yes, no, no, not in those words. So composition is another thing that comes under the rubric of form, but still composition is important. Yes, people who write about artwork talk about composition all the time. Often they don't even like to use that word, so they talk around it because composition to some of the,
Very
you know,
general.
yes, it seems, yes. Um, all right. Luke, do you have anything else to add?
I guess it's an analysis in describing something in detail of basically, composition, which is kind of both not and part of description, and also looking at additional formal elements of piece. So like, as Mars said, line, figure, but also I think an important component for this is color, even though we're not at that point historically yet. Expression. So like, expression can exist within a image, either like visually as like a facial expression or just the expression of the artwork. Body language, as Mars said, environment, as Mars said, and I think I covered all the bases.
Good. And Katie, I'm going to give you a chance to see if you can pull anything else out of this idea of description.
Yeah, so based on the reading, I think three main things, which most have already been said, was to describe and then to interpret and judge the piece, those three main things. And then for describing, you're looking at the subject matter, the medium, and the style. And then another huge thing that the book or the reading talked about was the compare and contrast piece.
Mhm.
So you're comparing and contrasting like that photographer's work, like the same photographer to maybe earlier works of that person, or you could even like look out at other photographers and maybe compare it to another person's work, and kind of making those comparisons or like the differences between the works. And then also looking at sources, so internally or externally, it talked about. And that's like going to libraries or other artists or like or press releases, it said, maybe like other critics' opinion to like gather other information on what has been said. Like I guess kind of what we're doing with this assignment, like on the exhibit work.
Good.
I have
Good.
something else to add.
I'm sorry, go ahead, say it again.
One thing that also comes into my mind is looking at the iconography, specifically. Like I'm thinking about, like, I'm in art history right now too, and we look at different paintings and portraits and things like that, and look at like the different, say, like symbolisms or like different animals in it that might reference back to like religion, and even thinking about these photographs of like, say, seeing people posed with like items in their home to show like their social class, and like sort of having that type of reference, or thinking about the depiction of slaves and what type of what this photo is like meant to mean.
Good. Now, guys, all of you have kind of delved into the rest of this chapter, because what Terry Barrett is doing, he's starting off with just the concept, and everything you said, he's proposing defining description, and you've all started talking about how description works. So let's move on. Now, this is a photograph by Richard Avedon. Now, Barrett uses this exhibit of Richard Avedon's as a kind of an entryway, because this exhibit, this took place in it was a while ago. I'm forgetting the dates, but that's okay. Avedon was a fashion photographer up to now, a very successful fashion photographer. He was innovative. He also did a lot of portrait work. Now, this was done in 1955. Think about 1955. Not that any of you were there. Believe it or not, I was 1 year old then, but I didn't know anything about Richard Avedon. So let's take a look at this. And let's start describing what you see in order to kind of get at this. Sophie, name one thing you see in here. Maybe you could say the thing that jumps out at you first.
The woman and the elephants are posed in pretty
Okay,
much the same way.
good, good. The two elements. There is a woman, there are elephants, and they are posed. Okay, that's a good place to start. Mars, expand on that. And
Well,
make it short so everybody else has a chance too, because just because you have this wonderful way of filling in everything, and because you're looking deeply at objects. So let's go ahead. We've got a woman, elephants, and posed. What else?
it's a black and white photo, and the
Mm.
elephants are in grayscale, and the woman is specifically like represented in black and white.
Terrific. So we're talking about form. It's so important that this is in black and white. It's so important that the contrasty figure is in the center and the rest are in gray tones. And because we're photographers, we kind of know what that does to us, how we approach it. Angel, what else are you noticing about this?
I noticed the trunk in her arm and then their legs. Like her leg is pointing down and it's not pointing down, but like it's in like the same position too.
Mm-hmm.
So they're like doing the same pose.
Yes, they are doing the same pose. So when Sophie said that, Sophie, I'm calling you Sophie. Is it Sophia? I'm sorry.
Either's fine.
I'll call you Sophia. I see that in your thing, and I have, okay, sorry about that. Yes, in the pose, Angel, they are mimicking each other.
About the head position too.
Correct. The head position, the arm is in the same thing that the trunks are doing. Terrific, terrific. Jacqueline, what else do you notice?
I guess I was just going to say like the contrast between kind of like the elephants like and the ground I guess is kind of dirty, and then you see her in the middle and she's like very clean, and I guess there's contrast between those two.
Good, good, good. Because Jacqueline and everyone else. Now, Mars talked about the contrast, the black and whiteness of the dress, and the mid-tone scale of the elephants. So that's one kind of contrast. But you're right, Jacqueline. The contrast of the content being this model wearing this Christian Dior silky dress, beautiful white, expensive, with these, it is contrasted against the hay, the wrinkliness, the kind of well, I don't know if the elephants are dirty or not, but it's a contrast in the content. Smooth versus rough, clean versus dirty, perhaps. Great. Dennis, tell me something else you notice about this. Dennis,
Um,
oh, there you are.
it's probably not that important, but I just noticed there are 3 elephants. I thought there were 2.
Good, that's important to notice. It's important to notice. Look around the photograph. Are there other things going on in here? What other things have not been mentioned?
See if I can zoom in. Oh, the elephants are chained in there.
Yeah. Now, Dennis, if you were going to start analyzing this, do you think those chains have anything to do with how we respond to the meaning of this? And meaning, we know that this is a fashion photograph, so we're not looking for, maybe deep meaning, but what do those mean to you?
It means that the elephants are, I mean, it was kind of obvious that they were in captivity by the rest of the environment, but that
Good.
they're actively being restrained.
Good. Good. And how does that contrast with the model?
Standing there freely of
Good.
her own accord.
Good. Yes, absolutely. So there is another form of contrast in this. And it's really, really important to look at all those things. Let's see. Luke, can you start analyzing this anymore? We don't have to, we've described a lot of what we see here.
I think definitely I like how Dennis described the elephants being chained. That was the first thing I saw too, because back in the day, elephants like this were chained up. And one thing I did notice is I believe most of these elephants are female because they don't have long, elongated tusks. That's a sexual dimorphism of elephants between the two sexes, so male and female. Females have very small uh, tusks compared to the males. That's one way of showing similarity between the woman and the elephants. I think it could also be a metaphor for slavery because elephants were very impactful animals for human evolution and like human society as time progressed. We figured out that we could tame and control these animals, but these animals are very smart compared to others.
Good. Good. Yes. It seems to be that in the course of Western, and I put civilization in quotes here, that this taming of our environment, this taming of nature, is something that the Western mind seems to feel like it's their right to do.
There's a really good quote from the book Heart of Darkness that really reminds me of this scene, but I forget what it is.
Well, another book that came out of this whole era of colonialization, right? It's an important book, but it's also a very troubling one. So anyway, we've got so many things to look at here. We have this idea of this woman who is free if she's wearing a Dior, like any of us, if we could afford to wear, these kind of clothes, is kind of the master of the universe here. The master of it's the beauty and the beast, except the beast is tamed.
I have something to say.
Please say it.
Also looking at this, I see like elephants as being a symbol of intelligence and of high society. And like this woman wearing Dior, like Dior is high society, like only rich, wealthy people get to wear that. And they are also like wealthy people are seen as being more intelligent. And I also see the elephants being chained in this woman. I actually don't see it as an interpretation of her freedom. I see it as actually her lacking of freedom. freedom because she is in high society, because she is representing the face of Dior. She doesn't have the room to express like her free, raw self.
Hmm, hmm, hmm. So guys, what's happening here is exactly what happens when people critics, when they write about a certain show, which a lot of people wrote about this show, they come up with interpretations based on a lot of the stuff we're doing here, but also based on their knowledge of history, based on their knowledge of art. And so this is what we're doing. This is kind of exciting, and you guys are doing this really well at this. I'm gonna go I need to keep going. I love talking about artwork, but this right here is okay. Examples of some of Richard Avedon's fashion work. Now he started doing photography young. He came from a not wealthy family. In fact, a very middle to lower class Jewish family in New York. His father was in the garment industry and just eked out a living. But Avedon was always around clothing and fashion as a young person. And so when he, started growing up, he started taking pictures, and really quickly he got snapped up by Harper's and then eventually Vogue magazine. He became their major photographer. Because he was willing to take risks. Now, in the 50s, still there were fashion photographers who were basically showing the clothes and not showing an attitude. And he started showing this attitude of free, of silly, of jumping. So in his, whether he was out in the streets, he would have this model jump over and over and over again until he got the right shot to show something, express something about fashion. Yes, she's wearing whatever kind of coat that is, but there is something about the attitude of a person who wears that coat. You're fun, you're free. Same with the image on the right. Obviously, he's back in the studio, and a fashion shoot is one of these wonderfully fluid things. You've got the lights, you've got the makeup people, the stylists, and you've got the photographers, and you're talking with your models, and you've got music playing, and you're constantly shooting and trying to work with the model. And in the course of all of that shooting, you get the image that you want. This person is not even straining to be on that one toe, right? The dress and the hair, you can see, is carefree, and that's what he started selling, was an attitude. Same with this, we're not even looking at clothes, we're just looking at this huge amount of hair tossed up in a with a relatively fast shutter speed. Most of the image is hair. Things like this, I don't know how these models didn't hurt themselves after a whole shoot, because this is defying gravity. But you can even see that he was probably influenced by the surrealist mentality, which also was popular in the 1950s. Surrealism, and how, yes, defying gravity and creating something that's almost dreamlike. This right now, he also did a lot of portraiture. So once he becomes a big famous fashion photographer, well, everybody wants their portraits taken by him. So this guy's making great money, by the way. One critic who was talking about Avedon's work, this woman, I think Susan Wiley, Avedon presented the frailties of the body, the sags and the bags, lines and pouches that flesh is heir to, the double chins, enlarged pores, glazed eyes, and sullen expressions of the rich, the powerful, and the famous. So This is the Duke and Duchess of Windsor. Most of the time, royalty will have their images taken so they're looking really good, perhaps looking really younger. And you can see something different in this. And Katie, just a quick glance. What do you think? These are the Duke of Windsor at one time was give you a little background in case you don't know anything about the royal family. I know a little bit. Watch The Crown. He was king for a little while, but he fell in love with this woman who was not only American, but she had been divorced. And so he could not take the throne. And he lived kind of almost in exile ever since he was deposed. So, with that information, do you think Avedon is capturing something?
Yeah, and I think it's interesting how in the lower left-hand corner, I think you can, is that his hand? You can see a bit of his finger, like you can see like a tiny bit of his nail. So they're like embracing, you can tell. So, and then hearing what you just said, was like he had to choose love over maybe his role as a
King.
as king, yeah. So it was like this choice. Maybe the photo explores that a bit.
And how?
Because they're embracing in the photo.
Good. Embracing. Sophie, what else? What other features here did Avedon bring out to describe this couple?
Their expressions.
Yeah, what is that?
It looks concerned, kind of sad.
And good. I think so too. But what makes them look that way? What did Avedon capture to make them look that way?
I mean, he got all the small details in their faces.
Good. All those details. And look at those lines. You know those worry lines. Then you see them mostly in us old people because our skin just shows the worry more than when you don't have all that extra skin. You have those worry kind of lines. Look at his eyes and look at their mouths. They're not smiling. They're posing, but they're not really portraying something that you would think of a happy couple, although they were happy together. They loved each other. They did. Anyway, film director John Ford. One of the things that Barrett talks about when you're describing something is describing the medium. Mars, what do I mean by the medium?
You mean like the means of how this image was created, like whether it was photography or painting or drawing or sculpture?
Good. Now, since we know these are photographs, could you say something else about the medium? And it takes a little bit of a careful eye. It's okay, Angie, Angel. What else do you see? Medium. What medium can you?
I would say that the texture that he captured doing these photos is very hard to get, but he did like a really good job. Like you can like I feel like you can feel because like of his description talking about like the saggy skin and the cracks and the glazed eyes, like he was able to get all of that with the contrast of like the neck sagging, and you can see like the hair there, the forehead, and even though like the background is very white, but it just brings out the figure more in, I think.
Yeah. Now, Angel, you are the only person in class that has studied film and darkroom.
Yeah.
Is there
Yeah.
something you notice about this? Film?
Hmm.
I know what you're
Like the
getting.
border?
Yes, what about the border?
um, I don't know. Like, are you asking like why he left the borders on, or
Good. Those are the questions we all need to ask. Why did
okay,
he leave the borders on? There's a
okay.
bunch of reasons, but what's one reason why you would leave a border on? Katie wants to answer this.
Mm,
If you want to give it to Katie.
yeah, I'll pass it on.
I think I don't know for sure, but I think it's because he wanted to show people that he used every bit of what he captured. Like he didn't crop anything. Like this was his vision, and this is what he did this intentionally. That's what I mean.
Yes, yes. A lot of photographers did that. So as you're describing something, if you see a black border and that black border says something like Kodak safety film, you know that he didn't crop. He's showing you exactly what the camera saw. And so he's one, showing off, right? This is how good I am. But two, it's really reinforcing the process. You're looking at a photograph and it's almost like honesty. I'm even down to the kind of film I'm showing you. This is not Ilford film, it's not Agfa, it's Kodak. And if you knew even more, you might say this was probably a 6x7 format camera. So it was a large format. And what Angel was first alluding to is when you have a larger format, you can get more detail. Okay, so medium. Tilda Swinton, of course, and he's not showing like lines and stuff like that, but it's a pretty amazing image of an amazing person. Uh, Marilyn Monroe. Well, a lot of photographers shot Marilyn Monroe, as you know. One of the, she was the sex symbol of the 60s. He had her in the studio, and in this picture, he did manipulate. He photographed her over, and I don't know exactly how he did it. I think he might have done this right in the camera because that's the kind of guy Avedon was. He was just good. He knew how to do this without making it seem like there were ghosts. The black background has a lot to do with that. But anyway, it's said that Marilyn Monroe was, well, first of all, she knew how to be in front of a camera. As soon as the publicity was there, she was on, and she was gorgeous, and she was lovely, and she laughed, and she did exactly what the media wanted. So as he's photographing her, of course, any photographer, you take a break. And when they took that break, the lights went out in Maryland, and he had his camera all set up because it's not that he knew she was going to do this exactly, but he knew that there was something behind this. Just the way he knew there was something behind the Duke and Duchess of Windsor. And so by shooting Marilyn Monroe like this, all of a sudden, everything else is introspective. She's not looking at us. She's not smiling. Her shoulders are kind of more normal. Even her breasts, which we all loved, they're beautiful. They don't even seem to have the same sparkle as in the first image. So this is Avedon. He's not just looking at straight out beauty. He's talking about the complexity of what we see. Now, this is also good for students in intermediate because we are talking about beauty. And so anyway, Luke, were you about to say something?
I lost it.
Oh, darn, I'm sorry. I get talking too much, but so on to this exhibit. Now, everyone knew Avedon from that. Avedon and his team of assistants decide to go out and photograph the American West. And what he does is he goes out to oil rigs in Texas. He goes out to mining places out west. He goes to meat packing places. He goes to state fairs. He's looking for these people who are not the models, not the rich and famous, because that's who he's worked with all this time. And who was it that mentioned, Angel, you mentioned the white backdrop. Well, as we know in studio work, you put a white piece of paper behind your subject, and that's how you photograph people in the studio.
Yeah.
He brought his white paper with him. So as you're describing an image like this, yeah, have to talk. You can't talk about this without saying that this a coal miner from Somerset, Colorado in 1979, that he's not in the mine. He's in what appears to be a studio. Yeah, yeah. So let's see. All right, let me go through with this. So anyway, in this exhibit was an exhibit full of portraits, and Terry Barrett starts talking about one critic who writes for Newsweek. Now, the context of what you're writing for is also important, because one critic might write for Newsweek, another might write for Art Forum magazine. Jacqueline, what's the difference between a writer who writes for an art review for Newsweek or for Art Forum magazine? And you may not know what Art Forum is, but it's an art magazine, you know, and there's, what's the difference? Who's your audience?
I mean, the art magazine is going to be followed by a lot of artists instead of just like maybe more of the general public.
Exactly, exactly. So how do you talk to your audience? This is something you all need to know. In so far since you've been in school, your audience has always been your teacher. But you're going to broaden out here. You're not writing this paper just for me, although you are writing it for me, but you know, you are going to put this other hat on, that you're doing this for the general public. Anyway, so he starts out with this Newsweek review. And the first sentence of this essay starts, "In the thick of the crowd of portraits on display in Fort Worth by famed photographer Richard Avedon to document the American West, there is one immensely ambitious and revealing triptych." Now, we can unpack that sentence. First sentence, there's a, I'm going to say one of my favorite terms, there's a shit ton of information in this. So Dennis, what is some of the important information? Hopefully you were listening to this. In the thick of the crowd of portraits on display in Fort Worth by famed fashion photographer Richard Avedon to document the American West, there's one immensely ambitious and revealing triptych. Can you tell me some of the important things that he just told us? And are you muted, Dennis? Yep.
Yeah, I
Just
lost
name,
everything as soon as you finished talking.
so let's try Luke. What were some of the points? Just name one point that seems important that he crammed into one sentence.
how Richard Avedon is exploring people from the American West and describing them through pictures.
Good, good, good. And how did he frame Richard Avedon?
I'm not
He
quite
said famed fashion photographer.
Oh, so I think he's giving context because at this time Richard Avedon was a famous fashion photographer. Yeah,
Right. Go ahead.
but he's also kind of, I think he's trying to almost kind of make fun of him in a way because he's from a different world or place or society compared to the American people from the American West. His subjects or
He's
figures.
good. He's setting up a contrast right away. He's setting up something we don't expect a famed fashion photographer to turn his camera towards the American West. So right away, he's trying to generate interest in the reader. Like, what? And also, many people reading Newsweek may not know who Richard Avedon is. So instead of going into this detail, he just says famed fashion photographer, just for, as you say, context. Good, good, good. Go ahead, whoever just.
I was also going to say, like in this first sentence, it's like we get the who, what, when, where. Maybe not the when, and how, but like those main details that we need to know. And going off of what Luke said, I think this also is like, it brings in like drama. It's like a news flash. It's like this just in, like famed fashion photographer. It's like getting us like really gripped in as the reader.
Right, right, right. And you're absolutely right. And when he starts out, he says, in the thick of the crowd of portraits on display, the crowd of portraits. What does that mean? There's a lot of portraits.
Mm-hmm.
So he's starting out by describing the feeling. You go in and there is a crowd of portraits. They're not landscapes, they're not fashion, they're portraits. Just by saying that this show is in Fort Worth in the first sentence is saying that it's not New York, Paris, or Milan. Those are the big, like at the time, the three big fashion cities in the world. It was in Fort Worth. So for you guys, it's hard to start an essay with a bang like this. But I'm going to ask you to do that. To start by introducing, you don't have to talk down to your audience by explaining, well, you see, Richard Avedon is so big that he would never show in Fort Worth, but he da da da. He just says it. The rest of his essay backs up his first paragraph and his first sentence. So I guess this whole thing for me is about talking about writing, talking about how to begin describing. It is really important. All right. Good. Now, another thing that this writer, Douglas Davis from Newsweek, another thing that he did was first of all, he really does like the show, but he has issues. And he doesn't slam it, but he doesn't totally praise it. He gives us a whole interpretation of it. He has problems with it, and he states that from the beginning. He concludes in the last sentence that the show does not document the rest, but rather documents Avedon himself and his style. So from there, even if you don't know who Avedon is and you look at this, you're thinking, okay, I got to read on. Obviously, that's another thing that writers do is they try to pull you in. This is just a 35 millimeter print showing. Take a look, showing the sprocket holes, showing the number of the frame, all of that. in a way, the photographer who shot Avedon is doing an Avedon, right? Maybe an homage to Avedon because he was a great photographer. And these are the size of his prints. They were huge. These are all darkroom prints, obviously. Back in those days, there were no inkjet printers. So they had these huge mural rolls of paper that they worked on in the darkroom. And Angel, you know how that would be. That's a lot of work to deal with big, but he had assistants and they did all that stuff, you know. So okay, something that you guys can't really talk about because you are dealing with work online. You can't talk about the presence. When you're looking at a large photograph, it's really in your face, isn't it? You're face to face with someone whose face is actually bigger than yours. Maybe life size, but maybe even bigger. So you can inspect them. They can't inspect you. But you can go up and you can inspect everything about that face, and you can stand back, look up close. So the presence of these is an important part of your description. You will have other problems since you're just looking at this online. All righty. Now, that first sentence that I read, I'm going to just read part of it again. In the thick of the crowd of portraits on display in Fort Worth by famed fashion photographer Richard Avedon to document the American West, there is one immensely ambitious and revealing triptych. This would be the triptych. If a reader of Newsweek didn't know what a triptych was, he doesn't go in to explain to them what a triptych is. He shows them. So he's not talking down to anyone. He's paying respect to all of his readers. This is a triptych, meaning 3 photographs that make one. And of course, we could tell because you can see where the overlap. We can see these are 3 different frames. All righty. Let's see. Now, this image right here was not printed in the Newsweek article. And so, as a writer, he had to paint the picture with words. And of course, you know, that's what you will be doing when you learn how to describe and describe along with adjectives. Description isn't simply a dry thing. There are ways to describe, like even by saying that this was immensely ambitious is a description. He could have said it's big, but he said it's immensely ambitious and revealing. Now we have to know, what does it reveal? So what does it reveal? Sophie, what are some of the things that are a little bit revealing about this?
The expressions on their faces. Again, their bodies are posed, but their faces aren't really posed to look like pretty or happy.
Okay. Do they look sad?
Most of them, yeah.
Oh, they do. Okay. Good. Mars, anything else? This is, you know, even for us who are sophisticated, this is like, wow. You can imagine how big this is based on what you saw of that one portrait behind Avedon. Put 3 of those together and it was huge, right? So what else does it reveal?
I want to say like the toll that coal mining has on people and their bodies.
Yes. This is not makeup. Avedon went to the mine and he didn't do this all in one day. Obviously, this took a while. And it takes a while for people to get used to seeing you and to trust that you're not there to take advantage of them. And so He would find people and then ask them, is it okay if I photograph you? He would ask the bosses at the mine, is it okay if I just take a little bit of time? He'd put up his white backdrop. He always used regular natural light. Sometimes he'd bounce it off of a white board, but it was almost always natural light. And he would just line them up. He would talk to them too, in a way, like he talked to his models, but he didn't ask them to do those, he didn't ask them to do those poses necessarily. Okay. Now, when he describes this image for Newsweek, he uses words like these, they are grimy, they are lined up. He emphasizes, of course, the size, because that's how most people would have experienced it. So since you can't be there and you haven't seen this printed, you just have to talk about how massive this image appears, the experience of it. He explains that there are 4 minors, and he says one of them is split. And you can see the third one in, face is split. Something that I didn't realize until I read this, he calls it hypnotic and arresting. So because he was looking at these images intimately, he just got carried away with that face. It was hypnotic and arresting. Why? Well, he realizes that on one image, this guy has a beard. And if you look closely, it's hard to see because his face is so dirty. But in this image, he does not. There's some hair, back here, but not on his face. What does that mean? This is an easy one. Dennis, what does that mean? That one photo he's got a beard and the other photo he doesn't?
It means they were taken at different times.
Absolutely. So there is a way of getting in to Avedon's process. He went back and rephotographed this, I think about, what did he say, about a month or so later? Just enough time for this guy to grow a beard. And he split the guy's face in half. Now, if you take a look, you can see his hand on his belt in this image, and it's down on this image. Wearing the same clothes, has the same grimy face. So even a month later, nothing has changed. So this is also about time. We get a peek into Avedon's process, all just by looking closely and analyzing the image. All righty. Now, one writer who did not really like the show very much, he says, in many ways, Avedon's long-awaited new body of work is as two-faced as this minor. What? That's like that's, and yet there was a lot of back and forth about this. It's amazing work. And actually there were some art writers who attacked it for some things. And there's a lot of reasons why they might do that. But anyway, without saying it's bad, they just say something like that. It's kind of two-faced. And then has to explain why, has to back up their theory. You don't just drop a bomb like that without going on and talking about it. Why do you think she would say that this is two-faced? Does anyone hazard a guess? Let me go down the line. Luke, why do you think someone would say that Avedon was as two-faced as this minor?
Well, I think it comes from they believe that Avedon is basically glamorizing what is a very serious issue for people living in Western America. I think the viewer thought that Avedon was just kind of glamorizing on a subject he didn't really fully understand because he never really could. He's a fashion photographer, and he wouldn't really understand what coal miners go through, like with constant with working conditions, high death toll, and various other things. One thing I this is off topic, but one thing I noticed with this triptych is it's lopsided, and where I think one person should be on the far left, there isn't.
Right.
I feel like there's a presence there, but there isn't.
Yeah.
Does that mean something, or I'm just going to leave that up for interpretation?
Yeah. That's a good question. Yeah, Angel.
I was gonna say, in the first image of the woman and the elephant, he did the same because you couldn't see the third elephant, but he like took up the space, and then the one on the further left,
Let me just go
even
back
though,
to,
yeah,
yeah,
there
okay.
was like still space. Like I feel like in a lot of his work, he left space there. There was always space. So you just like imagine there's something even for this one. There's like space
Right.
on the other side. So I think
Exactly.
he does that on purpose.
He does, of course. Nothing is accidental with Abaddon. Yeah, nothing is accidental. Yeah. I mean, sometimes he does center his people, but often he doesn't.
Hmm.
So, Luke, I'm not sure we have an answer, but the thing is, the more you look at Abaddon's work, the more you can start to describe, well, what do you think that blankness does? You know, he's not about symmetry for some reason, you know, and I don't know, I get the feeling it crowds these guys even more
Hmm.
by
Maybe
giving,
you want to put yourself in there, in the position of them. I don't know.
I was thinking too more like a lost friend, like someone died and then they
Oh my
left.
gosh.
great,
Sorry.
that's great. No, you're right. Sometimes leaving a blank suggests absence. I don't know. But you see how even a blank part of a photograph can stimulate you to start thinking beyond, you know, it wasn't an accident, so what the heck is going on? Terrific. Terrific. And you're, Luke, that is one way of talking about absence, is leaving something blank. But
And
strategic.
also, see, like the person all the way on the right hand side also has that same sort of separation, and it almost looks like this triptych should have just been the three figures in the middle, and that would have really created like this balance form, especially with the way that these three figures like overlap each other's bodies and like their arms. But this person on the other end is shorter, and he's more in a stance of like solitude, like with himself.
Yeah, you're right. You're right. And, and of course, Avedon has him next to the tallest guy in the group, right? Which it reinforces his shortness. All very strategically done. Why? First of all, it's because Avedon has these terrific sensibilities for how things are going to look. He's got instincts, and he doesn't sit around and write down a thesis before he takes a picture. His instincts are like, whoa, look, do this. You stand there. Oh my God, look what's happening. Yes, let's do this. You know what I mean? He's constantly using his instincts. And that's something that you develop as an artist. The more work you make, the more you start to rely on your instincts. You may not know why you're making a mark, but if you start to trust yourself, you make the mark anyway. You might fail, you know, but you make it anyway because your instincts are just saying, let's give everything a try. Good. So I need to keep moving on. This is another one of his, and this is one of his famous images from this whole shoot. This is the Ronald Fisher, the beekeeper in Davis, California. The beekeeper obviously does not, you know, walk around bare-chested with bees on him all day, but Avedon did do this. So subject matter, you know, you do have to talk about the subject matter. What is it we're looking at besides just describing a figure with bees? What else is the subject? It's a beekeeper. That gives us a whole lot of information. Titles are important, especially in this series. So, well, in the review, in summing up some of the subject matter, he uses a sentence like this. He says, in describing all of these figures, there are ranchers, housekeepers, rodeo riders, and oil drillers, pigmen, meat packers, and an army of unemployed drifters. So just the repetition of how many different kinds of people, and he could have gone on and on, tries to tell the reader how comprehensive this is. Now, whether you believe it or not that it's a true representation, they are representations nonetheless, and they are photographs. And we have this beekeeper, and it's shocking. You know, when you go through, first of all, you see people covered in grime, and then you see this covered in bees. So there's a relationship. Another thing that someone talks about when they are describing this, another writer says, a bare-chested beekeeper stands before the lens with scores of bees crawling across his skin. The choice of words, you could say that there are a lot of bees on his torso or on his chest. But by even using the word skin, it makes it more visceral, like it's on my skin. And you start to feel it. So your choice of words can really illuminate and give the reader a visceral reaction to how creepy this could be.
I have something to say.
Yeah.
I'm thinking about specifically this photo, the photo of the miners, and the photo of the Duke and his wife, and even the photo of the elephants, and thinking about how like this symbolizes a lot of like trust and camaraderie. And the way that like specifically this, like you need to have a lot of trust inside of yourself to not be afraid of allowing these bees to be on your skin, and also imagining like the bees having trust in you to have that type of connection. And even thinking about the portrait of the Duke as well, like you could see that couple, like they were experiencing like the same thing, like they were in that sort of like bind together.
Terrific. And man, and as an essayist, if you're doing a critique, can you imagine, how you would illuminate the reader by bringing things like this up, by describing Avedon and his approach to photography? So maybe it isn't about being phony or two-faced, but maybe it is about getting at something else. So it all depends on who the writer is and what approach you want to take. Anyway, I do want to show you a little bit behind the scenes. I have this book called Avedon at Work, and it shows photographs of his shots. Now, do you see in the bottom right, he actually put some kind of, I don't know if it was a pheromone or if it was like honey or something, on the beekeeper's face, and the beekeeper was fine with that, having the picture taken. But Avedon in this is applying bees the way a stylist applies makeup. And so when you look at the way the bees are very beautifully around the neck and down the shoulders, that's part of Avedon as a control freak. You know what I mean? But anyway, so this is good. I'm glad you need to be knowing about Richard Avedon, his process, the kind of work he did. It is very important, but also to put some of these reviews in context, the reviews about this show. Because Avedon was a fashion photographer, the big art magazines were a little bit bitchy about this. Oops, sorry. Because he was a fashion photographer, not an art photographer. And so they were looking at him from a different critical viewpoint. His work had been commercial before this, not as some people might project, this solitary artist, you know, bearing their soul. So there's another way of being critical about the criticism, is looking at the context. Okay, so describing form and medium, we talked a little bit about that. The form, the medium in this case, if you are a little bit more knowledgeable about photography, let me just put you over here. If you take a look at the black lines around this, you may not know this, but this indicates that he was using large format film. And if we go back and look at his cameras, you could see they're large cameras. They are not handheld. The large negative, and in this case, it's 8 by 10 inches. That's how big the negatives were, right? If your negative is that big, you can get all that luscious detail that he could get in these images, and he could print them big without losing any detail. If you took one of your digital images and tried to blow it up like this, you'd get pixels, right? Unless you had an expensive camera with a big sensor. So that's another thing about describing the medium, is the kind of camera that he used. Some of the critics even went as far as to say he photographed with a Deardorff. Now, not everyone would know that, but maybe in the art magazines or in the photo magazines, that would mean something to some people, that it's a good camera, a big, good camera. Describing the style. I'm running out of time. Describing style. So we've already talked a little bit about Avedon's style. One is the white background. That's classic Avedon. The studio type of look, even though he's not technically in a studio. He has taken these people out of their context. This is a housekeeper, and you would only know that by the title, because this housekeeper is not in a house, is not taking care of children, or doing any of the other things that housekeepers do. That's that's the style of his work, taking it out of the context, and that's important. Comparing and contrasting is vastly important. When you put two images like this together, and you read the titles, you can see these are two different men. We can see they are both incarcerated at the Bexar County Jail in San Antonio, Texas. We might be going over, but I find that this is so important. Katie, what else can you say about these two? What are similarities about these two men?
They're definitely like mirroring each other with their tattoos and also their scars on the right next to the belly button. They're not the same, obviously, but there's something about the placement of both where they're both really similar. And then one has only one arm, and it looks like the other one has both of his. And also their face, you could see some scarring on the guy on the left. And their expression too, with their eyes like slightly squinted.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, good. So when you put two images together, you are asking the viewer to compare and contrast. What are the similarities? What are the differences? They are both incarcerated. If you look at their names, they are both Latino men. They both have the Jesus tattoos. They both have the scars. That's like incredible. And so, you know, this is Avedon. He's asking us to compare and contrast, but comparing and contrasting is more than just doing that. If you were writing about this show, you might say, well, you remember the image that he took of Andy Warhol. So you could contrast that with Andy Warhol's scars And the scars of these men, what are the differences? Well, difference in class, difference in intention, difference in all of that, you know. So there are stark differences between these people. So as you're writing, you need to compare and contrast. So this was a 13-year-old rattlesnake skinner in Sweetwater, Texas. And I would ask you to maybe contrast this with another one of Avedon's fashion images. And you may have seen this sometime in your life. It's one of his famous images of Natasha Kinski and the serpent. Huge difference. So you can enlighten your readers and you can come up with some theories by talking about Avedon's mind and how he works. So maybe these people are very much in the context of a fashion photograph. You can decide if you like that or not, but that doesn't matter. In fact, when you are writing these papers, whether you like it or not doesn't really matter. You can make judgments, but it doesn't matter if you like them. And so I would avoid writing anything like that in your images, but describe why something may work, or just, you know, compare it to something else. So anyway, compare and contrast. And another one of his older fashion photographs. And look at this. There's some strange differences. The light, of course, is different, but the pose, the look into the camera, the centrality of the figure, I find these things so fascinating. Avedon is one photographer with his sensibility, and he treats everyone the same in a sense.